When someone describes the feeling of something, a location, a piece of music, a scene from a piece of media, as haunting, what does that mean? It seems to be something we pick up through osmosis, rather than it being strictly defined. And while I certainly don't think I've come up with that definition that would be so helpful, I thought it would be nice to go through some of my favorite examples of this feeling being evoked, which happen to come from some of my favorite games. Let's start by talking about Dark Souls 2. There is no doubt that, even next to Bloodborne and its entirely different setting, Dark Souls 2 is the undisputed black sheep of the Souls games. While Dark Souls 1 and 3 seem to directly connect to each other in explicit ways, Dark Souls 2 seems reticent to acknowledge its predecessor with anything more than general gameplay concepts and a few obscure references, though even the gameplay has major functional differences from the first game, and the references to the first game include one of the most important objects from the first game being broken and hidden in the corner of a basement. It almost seems dismissive of the legacy left by Dark Souls 1, instead choosing to blaze its own path. But let's back up and start from the beginning. While Dark Souls 1 begins with an FMV which straightforwardly sets up its world through exposition, the opening FMV of Dark Souls 2 is cryptic and does little to set up its world, instead choosing to establish themes of curses and a warped immortality which causes those afflicted to eventually go insane. Your character will stand before the gate of a kingdom entirely forgotten by time, without really knowing why. To someone who expects more of the first game from the sequel, there's something missing here, but it's not so much that the intro fails to set up its world, but more so that it doesn't feel the need to. Things Betwixt, the game's tutorial area, is strangely evocative of the same emotions from the first game's Undead Asylum in entirely different ways. Both areas are depressive and unwelcoming, but while Dark Souls 1 does this very simply with dark corridors and dank sewers, Dark Souls 2 does this with a room full of old women chastising you, telling you that you're doomed to succumb to the curse, along with tutorial sections taking place within abstract tunnels inside of massive trees. The path connecting these tutorial areas also acts as an overlook for a massive underground sea, presumably stretching out far beyond what the fog allows you to see. It's a strange area that feels disconnected from the strangely whimsical yet slightly dark tone of the backing track that plays inside of the Firekeeper's dwelling. But what's more interesting is what comes after. Directly after leaving the darkened underground caves of Things Betwixt, a ray of blinding sunlight peeks through the opening in the cliffside. Majula is one of the most haunting locations I've ever visited in a game. Like any incredible experience, it's difficult to really put into words, but I'll try my best here. To stay on topic, this is by far the most brightly lit location in any Souls game up to this point in the series. Coming off of the first game's abundance of darkness and death, Majula is quite the departure. There's also no grand importance to Majula as a hub area. It's not located just above Firelink Altar like it is in Dark Souls 1, nor does it house the thrones of the Lords of Cinder like it does in Dark Souls 3. The context of the previous game's tone and contents add to this moment, but they are not component to it. Aside from this, Majula is a place of contradictions and disconcerting confusion. The land in spatial terms is insignificant compared to the rest of the game's areas, but it feels massive relative to both Things Betwixt as well as Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1, in part thanks to the massive ocean stretching into the distance which generates a large, echoing soundscape. It feels both empty based on its first appearance, but also crowded with several NPCs to talk to initially, with more interesting and instantly recognizable roles compared to Firelink Shrine's initial population. You may come to think that this land may have something uniquely worth salvaging because of this, but the character at the top of the hill next to the total player deaths leaderboard assures you that
there's nothing here for you, me, or anybody.
Even the character near the bonfire, the Emerald Herald, is confused about the player character's identity and their business in this strange place.
Are you the next monarch? Or merely a pawn of fate?
And what can be said about the music? Majula has, undoubtedly, the most unique backing track of any location in any Souls game. No other song in the series, or anywhere really, can scratch the same itch that this song does. It maintains the light, high fantasy instrumentation of the song from Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 1, but as it goes on, it only gets more strange and eerie. The song consistently feels off-tempo, with long stretches of near silence, absent any melody, just before returning moments after it feels like it should. And as the song reaches its looping point, a strangely off-putting section that feels bizarrely triumphant plays, only further confusing the piece's tone. It's contradictory. It's triumphant yet melancholic, homely yet distant, hopeful yet foreboding, unfamiliar yet nostalgic. Majula is a place that feels like it doesn't belong, both in the game's world and the Souls series' wider canon. It's contradictory, which leads to a disconcerting and uncertain tone. This is one way in which this haunting feeling can be evoked. Through strange inconsistencies and an atmosphere of uncertainty, Majula feels like a place that doesn't belong. And that's one of the strangest and most uncomfortable emotions one can feel, a feeling of not belonging. It's the feeling of something being missing, despite one's expectations, or the feeling of a misplaced experience of oneself or their environment. In this way, one of the most haunting experiences one could design would be a horror game with no monsters, no threats, and no scares, to evoke that uncanny feeling that something is just off enough, despite it being perfectly fitting otherwise. For a single tiny sliver of a massive world, just the first half hour or so of a long and involved RPG to evoke this feeling so completely, which is so rare to find anywhere else, is absolutely exceptional in my eyes. But that haunting feeling can't in good faith be reduced to just a single example, so let me introduce another game, One Shot. And before I do this, if you ever listen to me for just one of these spoiler warnings, let it be this one. Don't let me spoil the experience of playing this game for you. Trust me. One Shot, as a whole, is the most haunting experience I've had the joy to witness. It takes a very simple genre, the inventory-based adventure puzzler, and puts it into a radically innovative style of narrative with a single moment which occurs within the first minutes of the game. Our character of focus, Nico, wakes up in an unfamiliar environment. However, unlike most adventure games, the character does not describe the environment to themselves when the player interacts with an object. Rather, the screen darkens, and an external voice, always placed between square brackets, describes it instead. It is always objective and direct, with no personality to speak of. The player solves a puzzle in this room, and the computer begins talking to someone. Not Nico, but someone else. One Shot is about you. It takes your name from the local profile on your computer in order to directly and unambiguously address you. It's a very strange feeling, given both the context of practically every other game in existence, as well as the context of the game's most comparable contemporaries. In my many years of playing games, I have never once encountered one that has addressed me by name without me putting it in myself. On top of this, One Shot is much more upfront with its inclusion of the player in its story, compared to other games which similarly include the player. Something like Spec Ops: The Line puts on a performance for most of its runtime, pretending to be a generic military shooter, before pulling back the curtain, so to speak, and implicating the player in committing atrocities of war. When it comes to meta-narratives told through video games, there is no game which reveals the true nature of its narrative this early in its runtime. It's a moment that, because of that context, feels genuinely surprising and impactful, but also off-putting and even creepy to an extent. Following this tutorial area, and after the game has shown the first glimpses of its dying world, it only further implicates the player by casting them as a god of this world. And it's a strange feeling to feel so strongly ingrained in the world to the point where all these characters know your name and know you as a god from another world. When I bought this game around when it was released in late 2016 because it looked like Undertale and that's what I was into at the time, I felt like I wasn't ready. The game so thoroughly tricked me into believing the impossible conceit of its narrative that I just couldn't play it. It was the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary computer program. It was as if I could feel myself staring into the game, and the game was staring right back at me. It didn't help that the game's soundscape could easily be described as haunting all on its own, with every one of Nico's steps in this dimly lit house carrying with it a strong echo, and the music being difficult to fully describe. Just listen to the song that accompanies the main menu. There's more I could say on One Shot beyond this, but that would quickly get off topic. So to stay on topic, what is that haunting feeling? I think it's something that might vary from person to person, but for me, and based on the examples I've given, it's a feeling of disconcertion stemming from expectations and norms that we bring in when experiencing anything. The feeling that something is wrong, even obviously missing, but it still feels normal, like something matching those expectations was still used at its very foundation. A feeling like this, when combined with additional disconcerting features evoked through sound design or visual design, is what I think makes that haunting feeling, in art at least. When standard strategies for establishing a tone of unease are combined with a subversion of foundational assumptions about what that thing will be, that is a truly haunting experience, for me at least. And to do this effectively, with wit and subtlety, is a feat which should be met with high praise, and it has resulted in some of the best moments in the history of games as a medium. I only hope that I can feel it again sometime soon.